practicality to your everyday walk of faith. I am missing my co-host. You might notice the empty chair. Father Nicholas, he's actually away in Boston at a speaking engagement at the seminary. He does send his hellos, and he's certainly with us in spirit. Tonight, we're going to be jumping in to a very important topic, and that is autism. We hear about being on the spectrum, quite a bit in today's world, especially in the pop psychology world. We hear people throw that term out all the time. But I want to talk a little bit more about what it actually means to be on the spectrum and how many truly are on the spectrum. Well, according to the CDC, 1 in 36 children and over 5.4 million adults in the United States currently have autism spectrum disorder. The prevalence in both children and adults has actually increased over time. We are currently 1 in 36, as I mentioned, in kids, and that's just up from 1 in 68 kids back in 2010. So you can see how much that diagnosis has increased in prevalence in the last 15 years. In terms of adults, the largest increase in diagnosis that we are seeing has been for those, interestingly, between the ages of 25 and 34. We also know that underemployment is a major concern, with over 75% of autistic adults not being employed or are currently underemployed. So what do we need to know about autism, and how can we help? Here to speak with us tonight is our dear friend, Dr. Lisa Liberatore and Dr. Kimberly Reyes Giordano. Dr. Lisa, as many of you know, is no stranger to our show. She's the founder and president of Love Michael and U.S. Autism Homes, a 501c3 committed to providing autistic adults the opportunity to advance in the workplace and in the community. Lisa and her husband were inspired by their autistic son, Michael, to found both of these nonprofit organizations back in 2015 and 2019. Their passion to help their son and others in the same situation has led to both of their nonprofit programs, which we're going to hear about tonight. And they provide a life of dignity and purpose for autistic adults beyond the lives of their parents. And although she's based in New York, and so are these programs, she's really built a model that she really hopes can be replicated across the country. Dr. Kimberly is a licensed psychologist and board-certified behavior analyst who has worked in the field of autism for nearly 20 years. After having found a love for behavioral work while acting as a camp counselor for kids with ADHD and other behavioral challenges, she dove headfirst into this field. Currently, Dr. Kimberly has her own company and serves as the behavioral psychologist and consultant at Love Michael Homes and numerous other organizations across New York, and works with families in the area. So Dr. Lisa and Dr. Kimberly, welcome to Live with the Louhs.
Thank you. Thank you, Roxanne.
So, Dr. Lisa, your journey with autism really began as a mom. I'd love for you to share a little bit with our listeners about what it was like as a mom. And at what point did you learn that Michael had autism? What was that early journey like for you?
Well, Roxanne, at that time I was already a medical physician and ear, nose, and throat doctor. So you'd think I would have more of an insight. But no, autism in 1997 was not quite so much on everybody's radar. I actually did not have any medical training in autism. I don't think I ever saw an autistic patient. So when Michael, who was my second son, wasn't speaking at the age of 2, the pediatrician said, well, Alexander didn't speak at 2. If he doesn't speak after January 1st, let's get early intervention involved. So when I took him for his early intervention evaluation, which was a series of allied professionals who I actually never had much interaction with before, occupational therapists, physical therapists. There was a psychologist at one point. It was basically an observational day. And at the end of the day, the psychologist who was in the room said, I know what he's got. I know what he's got. And I said, what does he have? I thought, he had speech delay. Well, he's got PDD. And I said, what's PDD? And they said, well, that's pervasive developmental disorder. Again, blah, blah, blah. What is that? And they said, well, there's a spectrum of autism, and that's a spectrum. And I that's all I remember hearing, right? Because at that point, you just feel like, wow, the wind is knocked out of you. He left the room and left me with the occupational therapist and the physical therapist, who were both really did not like that bedside manner. And then I basically picked up Mike and left the facility, and my mother-in-law was waiting downstairs with my other son, Alexander, and saying, how'd it go? And I just said, I can't talk about this. Let's just go home. So that's how the diagnosis was made. And it was pretty gut-wrenching because, again, what do you do with that information? What do you do? You're in shock, really. And he was a little over 2. But I've talked about how retrospectively I could have seen earlier had I known what to look for. And that's why I'm really happy my colleague is here, because, it's 27 years later now. Michael is 27. And I really wondered what was different for parents going through that these days. And we were talking a little bit about that. But that was my journey. And
so tell us a little bit about how you launched into these nonprofit organizations and really the focus, how it sort of became preparing a future for those with autism, even beyond Michael.
Right. Well, I was able to have a full-time practice and care for Michael and my other son because I had a fantastic babysitter, second mom, my family. I mean, I had very good support around me, and he went to a good school that I think provided a loving environment. And I was able to supplement some certain things after school. But I would say it was when he was 17, he was in his school, and they were doing a holiday show and dancing and singing and everything. And I said, hey, to the principal, who had a good relationship with, what's going on with those guys? They're leaving now. They're graduating. What are they doing? And she said, we don't really know. And I was like, what do you mean you don't know? And one of the young men, Jonathan, I thought was exceptional. He was verbal. He was DJing for the party. And I'm like, if he doesn't have a job, if they don't know what Jonathan's going to do, what is the chance for Michael? Michael is, now we'll call it profoundly autistic, right? Non-speaking, highly intelligent, but certainly would be very difficult for anybody to give him a job or give him a chance. So I went home, and my husband and I went home, and I said, we got a problem here. We've got 4 years, and we've got to figure this out because I don't know what he's going to do. And we really just started to think about what he could possibly do. What was his skills? And he has a lot of talent, but one of the things that jumped out at us was cooking. He loved cooking. He was always by my side, prepping things for holidays. We also volunteered at our church kitchen. And I tell the story all the time because it was a seminal moment. We were volunteering at the church. The presbytera who knew him since he was a little boy set up a whole station for him, making moussaka, which everybody knows, that's that process. And he put his headphones on, and he just came in like a machine. And she goes, Lisa, you don't understand. This would have taken us 3 days. Like what Michael did in 1 day would have taken us 3 days. And I'm like, that's it. Bingo. This is a real thing. And how to go from there to actually love Michael was just constantly just a belief in the next thing and just going ahead with no real plan, right? The plan was, let's take Michael out of school. Let's try to work on skill building. And then once I did that, it was like, why don't we make a home business, right? Why don't we have a little business, teach Michael some gratitude. He's not just eating himself, he's giving it away. He signed his name, Love Michael, as a gift. And the product that we decided to make was really conceptualized by the chef, the young lady that was working with us, who the only reason she was working with us was because the timing was right. She just had a baby, and she was a chef, and she couldn't work in a typical job. So she heard about this through the school, and she came to my house and tried to pretend we were in a real school, everything that she would do in a school. And she said, let's make granola because there's no knives involved. And you want Michael to be with a group, right, which I do too, but everybody with knife skills, that may be unpredictable. So granola is a great process. I can teach all the skills, weighing, measuring, mixing, rolling, cracking. It can be made in one shift, which is very important for people on the spectrum to see a sense of completion. and it's and it was dairy free and gluten free, so he can eat that, which was because he had a sensitive gut system. And that's how we started granola, and that's how we started Love Michael. And it's 10 years. It's our 10-year anniversary right now.
Wow. I still remember the sample you sent us of the cute packages of granola from Love Michael. And I mean, what a vision, to see the gift in your child, and how hard I think that is for so many parents to look at their kids and go, hey, what's your gift? What's your strength? And, I imagine in a world that's saying, hey, we don't know where to employ your child, how much more anxiety there may be around trying to discover that gift. And I love that was just such a mom moment, to look at your child and go, okay, this is something that he would say yes to. It was intuitive, and what a beautiful ministry that you launched, from Love Michael. And so, I just want to thank both of you for the work that you're doing really in this field, to bring awareness to autism in general and to provide resources. One of the first questions I always get asked is, where do we go? We've been given this diagnosis. Where do we go? What do we do? And, I've got to be honest, I'm always sort of looking for the resources locally, to offer. And I sort of met with a lot of dead end phone calls that I make. And it's really tough. And so perhaps, Dr. Kimberly, you could talk a little bit about the diagnosis itself.
Sure.
What does it mean to be on the spectrum, and what types of things really would our listeners be looking for in terms of early detection in one of their loved ones?
Sure. So I think when you're thinking about, autism and a diagnosis, right, there are three classical sort of categories, right, of symptomology or symptoms, right? And so the first one is that, typically those on the spectrum have difficulty communicating, right? Some of them are able to communicate in full sentences, others in phrases, and others non-verbally, right, using picture exchange and otherwise, right? We have a general difficulty with also social relationships, right? Either initiating or maintaining those, right? And then lastly, in that cluster of things we look at in terms of a diagnosis are that people on the spectrum typically exhibit some sort of ritualistic or what we call stereotype behaviors, right? Things that go on and on and on, and that they engage in, but that have no real function, right? So some of the things that you might see that fall into that particular category are flapping, right? These movements that an individual might make that serve no other function other than some sort of like sensory input for that individual, right? So I think when we're looking at little guys, right, especially, and we have concerns, we're going to look at those clusters, right? I think for Lisa, right, your story was your first indication was that Michael wasn't speaking, right? And that by itself is not necessarily indicative of an autism diagnosis, but it's a part, right? But then we have that social piece. So some real, usually classic sort of symptoms are lack of eye contact, right? When you are speaking to them, they may have difficulty maintaining or even initiating eye contact, right? Or sustaining for that matter. Additionally, what's called joint attention, right? I'm looking at a sound I just saw, or sorry, a sound I just heard, and there's a lack of that joint attention to that thing, right? So there's that piece, right? And then relationships. Autism is a spectrum disorder, so not every two people or three people will present identically, right? So we'll have lots of individuals who will show strengths in one area and some deficits in another. But these are some of the more classic signs, again, are, lack of eye contact, a lack of joint attention, not responding to name, lack of communication, right? Especially, once we start reaching the 2.5, and then we've got these stereotype behaviors.
I love that definition because you're right. I mean, I think so often people come and say, well, how do I know this isn't anxiety? My kid's not maintaining eye contact, or, they're struggling with connection, and sort of how do we know? So it sounds to me like the three main clusters are sort of what you're looking for. And the stemming behavior seems to be one of the most, I would say, would that be classic, like generalized across the spectrum?
So I think that rigidity or that stereotype behavior like manifests itself very differently. We have, kids who engage in that flapping. Then we have like visual stimming where the fingers sort of dance in front of the face. We have people who engage in jumping. And then we have people who their ritualistic behaviors are very different than that. They line things up. They like things to be closed a certain number of times, right? So more like on the OCD kind of thing, in terms of like compulsion, right? Lisa was talking before about how many people on the spectrum, they enjoy the completion of things, right? If things are not finished, that can be somewhat like anxiety producing for them, perhaps. They get, emotional about that. And so it can be very wide range, but I think when they're little, it's very easy to go, oh, he's just excited. And he might just be very excited. And so his hands are in the air. But I think it's looking at it as these clusters. And if you have concerns in each of those areas, even if it's a couple, I was going to suggest that right there, Autism Speaks has this really good like modified checklist, and it's 20 questions. There's a quick little screener that says, hey, if you're concerned, and it will give you a risk factor at the end. So that kind of lets you know, should I go down this route of, pursuing more investigation, or is it okay? Is it typical, right? And I think that's a really, it can be comforting for some. And I think for some others, it can be that impetus that goes, I should really trust my gut because now I've got a little bit of evidence to support there's something amiss here.
Absolutely. And I'd love to ask you both, what about the idea of connection and somebody on the spectrum? They struggle with it, but do they desire it? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I love to pick that up. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions is that individuals on the autism spectrum are into themselves. That's right. They don't care about someone else's feelings, or they can't share. They don't have the theory of mind to understand what someone else is feeling. And I think that's so untrue. I mean, that's not my experience, our experience at all. And, I just had experience with Michael growing up, right? So people would say, if you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. That's the famous phrase, right? That everybody says.
Yeah.
But now with Love Michael, which is affected we've interacted with, over 50 people for sure. And now in Southampton with the homes and the community, there's a common thread is they want friends. They want connections. They just don't know how to do it, and they misunderstand those cues, those social cues. But we just hosted a dance last week, and over 100 young people came. It was for 18 and over, and it started to snow a little bit, and somebody could very easily said, the weather's not great, we're not going. There was no way to keep these young people from coming. Wow. They all showed up dressed to the hilt. We did a speed. Dr. Kim and two of our residents helped us put together a speed friending program. So they filled out a compatibility. Yeah.
I love
it. We called it speed friending. So there's no pressure. We're just friends. We got to be friends first. And over almost 25 of the 100 people signed up for it. More wanted to do it once they saw what it was. But everybody was so excited to meet somebody else and to have friends. So I think they just don't know how to, they lack that social skills of knowing how to make friends and how to engage and how to read signals.
I'm so happy you touched on that, because I do feel that is the most common misconception, is that they do not want connection or contact of any kind. And I'd love for you to maybe tap into, just sort of as a mom, like, what are some of the ways that Michael sought connection in ways that maybe other people might have missed or not picked up on as, his means of trying to connect? And I'd love to hear from you too, Dr. Kimberly, in terms of your work with other students and families. What are some of the ways they reach out for connection that others may miss or just misread?
Mm-hmm. So because Michael is surrounded by Italians and Greeks, where we greet people with a hug and a kiss. So if I say hi to somebody, or if I see, he assumes, okay, they must be family, go over and give them a kiss. And a lot of times on both cheeks. So that's not always welcomed by people
Right.
who don't, some people are taken aback. And again, most people, 9 out of 10 are like, oh, that's so sweet. But 1 out of 10 is not happy with that. And that is not quite as easily explained as you become a grown man. And that's one of the things that, Kimberly is seeing, that these guys don't really understand sometimes the etiquette of, what is acceptable and what is not. But Michael loves a bear hug. Michael wants to give a bear hug. Michael wants to give you a kiss on both cheeks. Jack, one of our other residents, he loves to give somebody a kiss on the hand, and, kissing on the hand, 10 kisses, 10 kisses, 10 kisses. And again, we're fine with that, but, that's not something you always feel like you want to put a protective, arm around these guys, because they are so innocent and so sort of wanting to love, but the world is not always a safe place for them if they do that to the wrong person, right? So there's quite a few sides to this. Some are beautiful and adorable and loving, and some of them are like, oh boy, that could really put them in, that could make them vulnerable and make them very much, at risk.
Absolutely. And Dr. Kimberly, your thoughts?
I want to go back to what Lisa was saying before, the question about, do they want social interactions? I think the misconception really lies in it's difficult for them. That doesn't translate to a lack of want, right? They don't know how to initiate. They don't know how to maintain in many cases. Some of the other reasons I'm thinking about in terms of how they manifest their need or want for like engagement is they'll engage in repetitive speech. And so somebody might say, he's always says the same thing to me every time I see him, what he had for breakfast, what he had for lunch, what I'm having for breakfast, what I'm having for lunch. And it goes back to, there is a want for that communication between themselves and another individual, but a lack of understanding. I should ask something different. I should ask about your day. I should ask about how your travel was, right? That inventory of responses that I think comes so naturally and we take for granted, right? Doesn't come so easily for them, right? That's something that can come over time if we, help them, certainly, but it is difficult, right? And so, I totally agree with Lisa that, you see a want for connection. And it can be in the form of affection and it can be in the form of communication. But it's certainly there. I don't think I've met really any individual that I said, oh, they want nothing to do with anyone, right? I think we can draw that out for them. And, especially with little guys, I like to tell parents early on, we want to teach them to live in this world, not to create a separate world for them, right? Because they live here with everyone, right? And we want them to contact and enjoy all the people in the real world, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. And so, what are the complications that individuals might face? Obviously we read about, I think I saw the statistic about 85% of even college graduates with autism are not employed. So obviously they had the internal resources to cope with a college setting and be educated. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about, the window of challenges, that families are facing in, this sort of gap between, their capabilities and the reason why they're underemployed.
I think one of the crippling challenges that I see across the board on the whole spectrum, the lesser need individuals and the higher need individuals, is an anxiety. I think the level of anxiety that we witness across the board is crippling. It's crippling to even consider going for an interview. It's crippling during the interview. It's crippling when at the workplace. Did I make a mistake? Am I going to be fired? How do I ask for help? I mean, anxiety is probably the number one thing that keeps coming up. And that's one of the things at Love Michael that we emphasize the most, is that you can make a mistake. It's no big deal. The granola fell on the floor. Okay, yeah, this fell on the floor. Like, we make mistakes. This is a stress has to be a stress-free workplace. But I think that's just, again, not the real world, right? Because the workplace is it's a harsh world. The world is a harsh place, and working in the food business is certainly for neurotypical people. You know, they talk about the stress of it and the anxiety. So I think anxiety is number one. Number two is rigidity. So difficulty with change, and that happens all the time. Why aren't we doing this now? But why? You know, what can, you know, are we doing that to, like, the hyper focus on if something needed to be changed, or we want to change something the way we are doing it, or anything that's a change is difficult. And then making sure that there's a clear explanation of things, that it's really clear. I mean, these are things that are good for everybody in the workplace.
Good for everyone, but not everywhere in the workplaces.
Correct. So very clear, and we use a lot of visuals. Not that the person needs a visual; they could read and they maybe not need it, but it reduces the anxiety by seeing it. It's a reinforcement. It's comforting. I don't need to ask that question. There it is. I can look at it. So we use a lot of video, a lot of visuals, so that there's consistency and clear communication. So.
And how might they deal? Go ahead, Dr. Kimberly.
No, I was going to also say that, you know, I think in the workplace as well, right? There has to be a lot of patience on the part of the employer, understanding that typically it does, you know, people with autism are not one-shot learners, right? Instruction alone, right? Like verbal instruction specifically, told once or twice, will not actually be what's required. There will be much more intensive. And so it's this understanding that you'll have to spend a little more time to get where you want, right? And I think that understanding and acceptance is part of also the difficulty, right? Because I think even a bunch of our residents are really capable, like in terms of their communication. And so it seems like, no, I get it, but they still also have difficulty grasping concepts and specifically procedures and things with lots of steps, right? And so this patience in the learning process, and that's not just to employment skills, it's just to about any skill, right? A lot of times their skills have to be broken down very small, like Lisa said, using visuals and videos and repetition. So
I love the level of detail that you guys are really providing around what works. And I think this is the visual that everyone needs, especially if they're ever going to replicate, you know, or attempt to replicate, you know, some of these models that you've designed, Dr. Lisa. But what are your thoughts about, you know, the intense emotionality that may come at them when they are in the regular neurotypical world, if you will, and someone's disappointed or someone gets angry or someone yells or somebody, you know, reacts? What is the typical, if there is a typical response across the spectrum, what might that be like for them to experience the intense emotionality of someone else outside themselves?
I mean, it can be varied, right? That could make somebody on the spectrum want to shut down and kind of not say anything and really wait to get home and kind of talk to their families about it. I think written communication seems to be a much better way than a verbal communication. I find a lot of our young men and women communicate better in written form, in text form. Sometimes I can't believe it's the same person that's texting me, that's speaking to me, and the level of the depth of the conversation is just, again, much more sophisticated and much more insightful in writing than able to verbally express it. So I would give the person a chance to be able to communicate, maybe not right away, but maybe, what do you think about, verbally? I mean, a written response. How did that make you feel? Because that definitely can bring up you get a much better idea. I think that I see our guys in general, they lack self-esteem. And so they take criticism or feedback in a very personal way. It's hard for them to accept it. It's hard for them to feel like they disappointed or didn't do something well. And that also leads to a lot of distress. I could see that.
Right.
But on the other hand, when it's done well and they have a couple of our young people have passed the New York City food handler's license, for instance, that was a tremendous boost of confidence that they didn't think they could do. One of the young men did not have a high school degree and thought he was not intelligent. He's super intelligent, hyper intelligent, and was able to, and that's not an easy exam to pass. They had to go online, take the online process, and then go down to a testing center and take it. And I think, passing that, like doing that, let him know, wow, if I could do that, I can do something else. So boosting the confidence, boosting the self-esteem, believing in the individual really goes a long way. But it's patience. It's a lot of patience, but it's very well worth it. I would say you will have employees for life. You will have employees for life. They are not looking for another job. There's a high degree of satisfaction in coming to work. During COVID, they were very upset that the bakery had to close for a period of time. Even though they were going to get unemployment benefits from being home, they didn't care. They didn't want the paycheck. They wanted to come to work.
Wow. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Well, we are going to take a quick break. And on the other side of this break, we're going to delve a little deeper into some of the myths and assumptions that exist in the world today around autism spectrum, and also the church's role in supporting individuals on the spectrum. We'll be right back.
Are you struggling in your walk with Christ? Do you want to rediscover your reason for living, the person you were created to be? Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan gives you the keys to unlock areas of your life that hold you back from fully experiencing the renewal and transformation God has in mind for you. Co-authored by a priest and a psychologist, Father Nicholas and Dr. Roxanne Lowe, Renewing You combines principles of spiritual growth with psychological tools to help you become your best self, fully connected with God's purpose for you. To purchase this book, please go to store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
Well, welcome back to Live with the Louhs. We're so hopeful that everyone is joining this program this evening on such an important disorder that is widely spoken about in today's pop culture. But today you're getting real facts from two experts and a mother who's started some just incredible nonprofits to help prepare a future and a path for those with autism spectrum. We are joined by Dr. Lisa Liberatore and Dr. Kimberly Reyes-Giordano. Just before the break, we were talking a lot about early detection, and the intricacies of working with individuals with autism. And I know we mentioned one of the earlier assumptions or myths that a lot of, pop psychology talks about, the assumption that people with autism don't want to be connected to or don't desire that connection, and you bursted it, and that's beautiful. I'd love to know, just from your experience in working with these kids and adults, and families and people who are associated with these ministries and organizations, what are the assumptions that they come in with that you are seeing, on a consistent basis that you really want listeners to know about?
I think that, one of the things, Dr. Lisa and I talk a lot to families and staff about, especially I think as our individuals get older, is that there are quite a bit of misconceptions. And I think one of the first is that, um, we're mixing sometimes personality traits with things that this person is trying to overcome, right? Deficits, if you will, right? So someone is, slower at a task, or, is repeating themselves and has a particular script of language that they engage in when they meet a new person. And they go, oh, that's just so and so. Now, while it is a part of that person's repertoire, it's not who they're destined to be, right? I think that one of the myths that I would always like to bust is that these things are permeable. We can change these things. We can help these people be beyond where they are now. So I would say that that's one of the bigger misconceptions, that they cannot learn new things because as people get older, we've apparently become static, right? And immovable, but that's not necessarily true. So I would say that is a huge one. And then I think the other one is, and we talk about this a lot, is, sometimes you will see some behaviors that, are not socially acceptable, right? Whether for a particular environment or with particular people. And these behaviors don't come from malice, generally speaking. They come from a lack of understanding the social norms and the cues and what's acceptable, right? And so busting that myth that someone's not trying to be naughty, it's that they don't know, and it's our job and it's our responsibility to really help inform them, right? This is an appropriate thing to do when we're on a bus or in a restaurant, right? So those would be, I think, two of the big myths that I think about and look at, especially as people get older. Lisa?
I mean, I also think that a lot of medical things are missed and they're attributed to autism. And I that's one of the things that we're constantly saying every day. So that behavior is medical, especially if there's an increase of a certain behavior, that's medical until proven otherwise. And we'll always say, how was the sleep? Oh, the person was waking up, 3 or 4 times last night. This person seemed to be using the bathroom, needing to use the bathroom multiple times. This person, so it's medical until proven otherwise. And one of the things that we'll constantly see is that our guys and young ladies do not report things to the caregivers at the stage at which most people would say, I have a problem here. Could you look at my foot? I've got a blister here on the bottom of my foot. Or, acid reflux, sleep, GI issues. Those are the biggies. And then a lot of our young men and women have a lot of sensory sensitivities. So it's not that they don't want to socialize, but certain environments will be very unpleasant and painfully unpleasant, like overcrowded places, screaming babies, certain lighting, but not everything. Like it all doesn't make sense. Go into a loud Mission Impossible movie with loud music and loud sounds, like that's totally fine. That sound is okay. But going to a diner where the person is clearing the dishes off the next table and just kind of throwing them to clear off the table and the metal, that could be, horrible. And so some of the stereotypic behaviors that Dr. Kim is talking about, you'll see those heightened a lot, but that's because the person is uncomfortable. It's not autism, and they don't have the language to say, this is really bothering me. So it'll come up in more flapping or like this, soothing, self-soothing to overcome a really discomforting feeling that's coming from the environment or a person, et cetera.
So that's a great segue into, go ahead, Dr. Kimberly.
Just one thing that I want to also highlight from before as well is, a lot of our individuals, unfortunately, they lack the emotional language, right? The language that details, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I feel sick, I feel nauseous, right? I feel sad, I feel unhappy. They don't know how to connect the feelings with the emotional language. So like Lisa's saying, in terms of, the uptick maybe in the stereotypies that we might see, right? They're not getting married with the language that's necessary for them to self-advocate for the thing that is, needs to be rectified. And I would say that, we had a conversation recently, Dr. Lisa and I, about them missing and us trying to really help build that strength up about self-advocating. I don't feel good. I don't like this,
Mhm.
because that language is, the emotional language is a huge part of the communication deficit for many.
And so that's something they're still learning, that you guys are trying to permeate and teach.
Yeah. And it's harder to teach that, I think, right? That this feeling goes with that word.
Right. So the segue, I had an email question that had come in previous to the show, and it was from a mother who talked about her child in Sunday school in the Orthodox Church. And she said that, her big question was, help, my daughter has been diagnosed on the spectrum, and she struggles in Sunday school anytime they start singing. And all the kids are laughing and having fun. And my daughter is covering her ears and begins rocking. And she said, I'm caught because I want her to be in Sunday school, but I fear she's uncomfortable. Do I continue to take her? Like, what do I do? So I'd love your thoughts on that.
So she's uncomfortable in the Sunday school with the children singing?
Yes, like whenever they break out in song. Mm-hmm.
From a therapeutic standpoint, I mean, one of the things I love the most about like what I do for a living is that there's not a really one answer. There's many different ways we can go about it. If it's very important to the family and they value being in church, right? And they want to be a part of this community and they want their child to be a part of the community, we can work on desensitization, right? Which is the idea that we can help someone acclimate in small increments to something that is or can be quite overwhelming for them, right? So it could be as easy as, we're gonna sit in here for 30 seconds while the kids are singing loudly, and then we're gonna go outside for 5 minutes. Gonna come back for 30 seconds, go outside for 5 minutes. On the broad opposite spectrum, you could say, this is not the battle I want to face right now. We have a lot of other overwhelming things. And so maybe it's a pause, right? We'll revisit when and if we can come back. So there's no real right answers. A lot of what I tell parents when I go and I help them decide what to do and how to do it is I go, it's not my family. It's not my house. It's your job to tell me what's important to you. And for my job to clinically guide you to a solution that works with the philosophy and the barriers of your own family. So it really just depends on what families want out of things, what they see for their child, what they see for themselves. So if that's somewhere they want to be, those are things that, become the skill that you desensitize them to. And eventually in small increments, they get there over time.
We've definitely seen that many times. Even as adulthood, there was a young man who would just totally take apart the dentist's office. There was no way to go to a dental appointment. He would have to wait to be sedated under general anesthesia. And the dentist that we work with, which I wish everybody could go to him, but he's only in New York. But it just shows you the commitment from the family, a family of dentists, and they desensitized Jack. It took a few visits just to come to the office and see the equipment and hear the sound, and we got a great video. Jack, and matter of fact, for Halloween, Jack dressed up as Dr. Furlano. He said, "What do you want to be?" He's like, "Dr. Furlano." I mean, like, for him to want to dress up as a doctor, a dentist, like, that's not going to happen. Yeah. Like, that would never. That's a miracle.
Yeah. And I think this is such an important lens for people to know what part they can play, what role they can play in sort of being what others need, and sort of having a compassion for other people's experience. And I think so often, the world has sort of come to a place of it's all about me, and we don't look at the needs of others. And so that's just a beautiful example of really considering what role we play in supporting people that we work with or work around, whether it's a ministry leader, in church, in schools, in the work world. I think we don't really ever stop to think, what accommodation could I make in order to sort of help this individual navigate this journey just a little bit easier and to make their world and burden a little bit lighter. And so speaking of that, I'd love to talk a little bit about what the church's role has been in supporting these ministries. Obviously, for people who don't know you, Dr. Lisa, you're in the Greek Orthodox Church in the Hamptons. We've been lucky and honored to be there with you guys. a couple of times now. And so maybe you could share with our listeners a little bit about the role of the church in supporting you, and how the community has even responded to these programs with their own involvement.
Mm-hmm. Well, Father Alex, who's the senior priest of our church, met Michael when he was just a baby. He actually did the 40-day blessing and baptized Michael. And once Michael, we started to bring Mike to church, it was pretty obvious that he was having a difficult time, but I wanted to bring him to church, obviously, as a family, young family. And so what Dr. Kim said, that's what I would do, bring him in for a little bit and take him out. My husband and I would tag team. One would stay with Alexander, one would stay with Mike. And the people in the church, when he was making noise, it was somebody turned around and said something. Of course, as a young mom, you always go, oh, no, And he said, I don't stop right now. Children, I want to hear the children crying in church. I want to hear the families. This is what we are about. And you stay right where you are, And so I do think it starts from the leadership. And that's always my first advice when somebody says, what can I do? I said, it really starts with the leadership. If they want it to happen, they set the tone. Alexander became an altar boy. Michael wanted to be an altar boy. How are we going to do that? By working on a Saturday, the day before liturgy, and kind of helping Michael and letting Alexander be his sort of mentor. The other young boys that were altars, if anybody made fun of Mike, someone else would say, that's our friend, so it just that culture. And when Michael got older and things got more challenging, and I think, everybody, many people know my story that when Michael turned 19, he really had a crisis, as affects a lot of young men and women, late onset puberty. I don't even recognize him. He went from a very an individual who would say, yes, whatever you want, basically go along, to, an angry young man. So difficult, so uncharacteristic that we couldn't manage him at home. We couldn't keep him safe and others safe around him. That's how bad it was. So he went into a crisis home in Long Island, which is for 4 people, 2-to-1 ratio. And Father Alex and Father Constantine at the time visited him at the crisis home and said, I want you to know we love you and we just hope you get better. And Michael gave, again, one of these big hugs to Father Alex, almost crushed him, hugging him. And, it's just like, we're not abandoning you. We're here for you. And so when we had the idea of, let's try to create an alternative residential model to group homes, because group homes are certainly a safety net that needs to happen. Both parents got killed in a car accident or something horrible happened. That's what the other young man was living there for. It's just a safety net. But it's not every parent's dream. And when you go to see group homes, what you many times see are rundown homes. Staff are not compensated properly, so people are not engaged. There's not an individual approach to the people in the home. You don't get to choose who lives with you in the home. You don't get to choose your staff. So we approached the Father Alex and Father Constantine at the time, who became a priest, and said, would you be the first faith-based supportive partner in creating a sort of a legacy program so that when parents are no longer around, the church represents a continuation of their mission and ministry and vision and beyond the lifetime of the parents. And of course, Father Alex and Father Constantine said yes, not knowing what they were saying yes to, right? Just like, yes, we're here next to you, whatever that means. And, I'm hard to say no to, right? I don't like it anyway, but they said yes. And so what the church has done, and I think is pretty remarkable, and why we hope to inspire other faith-based communities to do what we're doing, is to be an anchor to a group of homes that are in the neighborhood, but not in a gated community, but throughout the neighborhood, close enough that you can be a built-in friendship network. Each of the homes has 3 or 4 individuals in the home with a live-in caregiver, and they come to the church every day for a period of time because our church has created we've created, but the church has given us the space to create community classes. And the community classes are everything that our guys say they want to learn, because we're committed to lifelong learning. You don't stop learning. No one stops learning. So they wanted to learn sign language, and they have acting classes and music and cooking, of course, and global cuisine, which is taught by the older ladies in the church. So like the churches keep all these people in our church really are committed to a philanthropic mandate. That's one thing that you're going to find in churches, people who want to have an active ministry. And those things are what exists in a vibrant, robust, faith-based community. And we have 9 residents. They're not Greek Orthodox. They're of every denomination. But Michael is Greek Orthodox, and so is one of the other young men. But everybody wants to go to church on Sunday. And they take up, I was counting our guys and some of the parents who now come because of their coming, and then the staff who comes. I mean, we're like sometimes 20% of the individuals in the church, right? Kim,
so all of these kids are in these homes that you guys have provided. And then they all come in during the week and participate in these classes that help them continue to learn. And then they have these homes they can go back, and they also have the business where they can sort of help produce and raise funds as well.
Right.
This is an incredibly well thought out mission. And I'm sure, if there are other churches and clergy, or Philippics leaders listening to this, and they would want information on how to maybe recreate something similar, where would they be able to reach out to you for more information on how to get this model into their communities?
I mean, for your listeners, I would just have them email me directly and say, that, the Louhs, we heard you on the Louhs, because I think somebody who really wants, it starts with parents, right? Parents with a relationship with their clergy, and it's of every denomination this works for everybody. We've had 2 rabbis that have come, a Catholic priest from up Scarsdale. Like, this works for any faith-based community, as long as they're committed to interdenominational, they don't want to push any one religious agenda. That wouldn't be right. But in saying that, one of our residents, Jenna, whose parents she was raised Catholic, but not really practicing. And she's been coming to church now for 3 years, and she's done readings and everything else. She came to me 2 weeks ago, and she said, I have something very important to tell you. And I said, what? She said, I want to join the Orthodox Church. And I said, really, Jenna? I said, are you sure? Did you talk to your family? She said, oh, yes, they're very supportive. She says, I feel close to God.
Oh, how beautiful. Oh, how beautiful. That just makes everything you've done. Icing cherry on top. We had a comment that just came in to YouTube, and it's from a woman named Patricia, and she says, I have Asperger's. I know it's called something different now. And one thing I could never stand is people finding out and then deciding for themselves what I can and cannot do. And it feels as though my entire existence has been pathologized since this diagnosis. Any words of wisdom to share with Patricia from either of you in relation to that?
I mean, Jenna says it all the time. She said, I have autism, and autism doesn't have me. That's not all I'm about. And I think it's up to the individual on the autism spectrum to say that, right? So I've seen some people who I feel use autism as a reason for why they can't. And I see some people with autism feel that it's their superpower, and that's something that they're proud of, and they're it helps them be very focused on something and very detail oriented. So it really, I think the individual has the opportunity to have their own narrative, whatever that is. And if you tell people the way it is, they will believe you. We presume competence, right? We presume competence. We talk about this all the time. Believe that it can be done, give the person a chance, but understand what we have to do to support them to make them as successful as possible in whatever it is that they want to do.
I love that. I love that. Dr. Kimberly, any words of wisdom as well in the final few minutes of our show?
Sure. I would say that, I want to encourage parents, caregivers, family members, right, that as you help support that individual with autism on their life's journey, that life is not always linear, right? Just like it isn't for many of us, right? Every day is not the same. There won't always be a win, right? There might be regression and things slide back, right? But I think you always want to try to keep the needle moving, right? In the right direction. Keep looking forward, put one foot in front of the other, and tackle the next thing, right? It can feel very bleak, but the wins are there, and you just keep looking for them.
I love that hope and that just beautiful foundation of confidence that you both give to anyone who's listening and who may have a family member who struggles. I'd love for you both to maybe shed light on local resources that may be available or national websites that help. Obviously, I wish that everyone lived in the New York region just so they could take part in this amazing ministry and nonprofits that you've created. But where would you send people who say, you know what, I went on Autism Speaks and I did the assessment and yeah, it's kind of looking like it's going in that direction. Where do we find help? What do we do next? Like what's step 1, 2, and 3?
I think you want to start. So the CDC. Oh, sorry, Dr. Lisa, do you want to go?
Go ahead, go first. I'll chime in.
Oh, so the CDC has a really nice link under the page "What is Early Intervention" from the CDC, and we can help provide the URL and so forth. But what it does is it goes by state or territory, and it tells you how to contact early intervention, right, and what the methodology is. And I believe it links you to that state's particular resources, because early intervention is a great first step, right? It's either free or low cost. You're able to get your child evaluated, right? Like Lisa said, with a psychologist, it's usually a whole team approach. So it's a psychologist and allied or related providers, right? Like a PTOT, speech, etc. And even if that doesn't produce anything, but you're still concerned, the best part about also early intervention is it's not a one and done thing. You can revisit it, right? So every 6 months, you can ask for another evaluation, right? So that if things are getting missed, right? Because they're using normative data, right? To tell us where kids should be. And sometimes kids don't fall into that perfect little, range. And so if you give it a little bit more time, right, that you continue to, follow up. But Dr. Lisa and I were talking about a lot of it being like, as a parent, trust your gut, right? Like if something seems amiss, continue to investigate. And earlier is always, all of the research will tell us earlier is always going to be better, right? To try to make a concerted effort to figure out what's happening.
If you wouldn't mind sending us those URLs after the show, that'd be great for anybody who reaches out. And in our final minute, Dr. Lisa, any other thoughts on that?
I think the Autism Society of America has chapters everywhere. In our local chapter, they provide free, it's a very minimal cost to join, like $20, which can also be waived, but they provide a lot of free opportunities for parents to get together and have opportunities to go to movies or different venues that otherwise they would have a hard time going to, and kind of desensitizing, and I think that's really helpful. And then the Autism Science Foundation is very much of a very trustworthy, scientifically validated information on autism. So there's a lot of things that parents are sold, snake oil and all kinds of crazy things. And so I appreciate the Autism Science Foundation and their evidence-based approach.
I love it. Well, thank you guys so much. I told you this was going to go really fast, and it did. It does. I have like 5 more things I'm dying to ask. But as always, we're going to have you on again, in the coming months. So thank you both for joining us and for your pearls of wisdom tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. We are also wanting to thank Matushka Trudy for always producing this show with her. You can never see her behind the scenes, but she's got this great, big, beautiful smile and presence of joy. And so in your hearts, just thank her tonight. And Simon Nelson, who runs our YouTube page. They always do such a great job. So thanks for joining us tonight. And we'll be right back next Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And join us for a brand new Live with the Louhs.
Father Nick and Dr. Roxanne are the authors of their books, Renewing You, a priest, a psychologist, and a plan, and 6 Hours, 7 Lessons, How Christ's Light Transcends Our Darkness, which can be purchased at store.ancientfaith.com. Their daily inspirational messages can be found at thelouhs.com/subscribe. Be sure also to search for The Louhs on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Live with the Louhs is a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.